Welcome to the course on Dockers using the Oracle Linux, which is through the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Let me now provide you with the topics of coverage in this course. There are two parts. One is the virtualization part and the other one is the Docker part. So we'll be starting off with the virtualization. So what is virtualization in the cloud environment? And then we'll be discussing about what is a virtual machine versus a Docker. And post that we'll be getting into the virtualization, and for that we'll be using the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So first I'll be discussing about getting access to the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Since last year, Oracle has introduced a free tier option wherein certain components within the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure is always free. One among them is of course the instance creation, computer instance creation, and we can use Oracle Linux instance. So if you compare with the other cloud infrastructure providers like Amazon or Google for that matter, it is only for a time period. It could be for maybe for a month or a year. But in case of Oracle Cloud, there is a free tier concept which is always free. So you can go on using it as long as you wish, irrespective of any time period. And you can use the Oracle Linux environment there. So I'll be discussing about how to get access to the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Then we'll be creating Oracle Linux instance in the cloud infrastructure and how to access them through the client. We'll be using Secure Shell, PuTTY will be using, and then I'll be briefly touching upon some of the quite important command line commands which is used in Linux, Unix. It is very brief. It is not, command line command can itself be a separate course. I'll be touching very briefly about the common commands which is used. And post that, we'll be getting into Dockers. The Dockers came into the commercial world somewhere in 2013 or 14. Before that, Dockers was not there. So I'll be discussing about the software development evolution process in last couple of decades and how we reached a point of Dockers, and then what is a Docker, and then getting Dockers installed in the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. How to do that? And we'll be going into the first program with Dockers, which is naturally the Hello World program. And then we'll be working with images, containers, which is all about Dockers, and we'll be installing the one of the open source web server, Nginx. We'll be downloading the Nginx image and installing it and accessing it from the browser. And then we'll be building up a Docker based web application. So using web server Nginx in Docker and accessing is a simple application. We'll have create an index HTML file and see how we can access it through the browser once we have built the Docker image in a container. Then we'll getting into Docker files, which is quite important as far as Dockers are concerned, and we'll be having building up a simple Python application using Dockerfile, and then we'll be using Dockerfile to build image whatever we did over here, but in this case we'll be using a Dockerfile to build the web image in Nginx. Then we'll be using Docker Compose, which is basically having a multiple containers in a single node, and we'll try to whatever we did earlier with the Nginx, and we'll make it a little more complex to have multiple containers within a single node. So a simple web application of Nginx and Redux container creation through Docker Compose. And finally we'll be looking at the Docker Swarm as well. Introduction to Docker Swarm and creating a Docker Swarm where you have the manager and the node concept, I'll be discussing on that, and finally creation of service in the Docker Swarm. So wherever needed, I have also built in quiz so to test your knowledge. So once you have registered in the course, see you inside the course. Thank you and cheers.